Yeah.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney, and I will be presenting this webinar today with Salome. We will be talking with coffee consumers to understand better how we, as a coffee industry, can create fruitful relationships and loyalty. We all know that every end consumer is unique in terms of what they value, what tastes good, what interests them. And this is as much of an opportunity as it is a challenge to satisfy everyone's very specific needs. And it's challenging and to create loyal customers. And it's a marketplace with a lot of choice. So that makes it even harder for everyone at the end of the spectrum to find what they want and what they love and repeat that good experience. To understand some of the main requirements for consumers when purchasing coffees, we have partnered up with a range of customers and to try and figure out what they are really looking for. What are important areas in a general sense, and how can we build these kind of loyal relationships? And how can consumers evolve over time with us as we grow? And what is the best way to reach them? So here's Salome.
Yes, so ideally we want to talk and for the customers, the end consumers, to walk us through the story of how they did become coffee consumers and coffee lovers. We will start to get to know everyone. So if you are part of this webinar, we are going to throw a poll to see who are we talking with. Please vote. So we know who are we talking with. We know that we don't often get closer to coffee consumers. So this is the opportunity to get close and ask questions to what's important? What are you interested about? Let's give it a little bit more of time and then we can continue. Okay. So here we are. So most of the people we're with is coffee lovers, some exporters, and some coffee producers. Hola, productores de café. Thanks for joining. So let's start meeting our panel. And let's start with you, Brian, and then we can go over. So please introduce yourself and let us know who you are, why are you here, and why do you love coffee?
Perfect. Thank you, Sydney. Thank you, Salome. My name is Brian Gaffney. I am a specialty coffee lover and have been for probably the last 13 years. And for me, that's always fairly easy to remember because my oldest is 12. And so I really started drinking coffee seriously about a year before he was born because I was getting myself ready to be a parent. I live in Brooklyn, New York with my wife and 2 sons. And yes, love coffee. Really, I still remember the first roaster with whom I had a relationship was Intelligentsia. And that's really where I started exploring. And that really all came from a barista who one day said to me, Raphael, I still remember from Choice Cafe here in Brooklyn. He said to me, Brian, I always see you put milk and sugar in my coffee, but you never taste it first. Taste the coffee. And if you like it, then drink it. And if you don't like it, then add the milk and sugar. But it was really from that first invitation that Raphael made to me some 13 plus years ago that was the beginning for my relationship and love affair with specialty coffee.
Wow. Such a long time ago. That's impressive. Sally, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. I'm Sally. I'm a retail lead at a co-op here in North Carolina. I've been a lover of specialty coffee for a much shorter amount of time. I think probably maybe the past 3 or 4 years, like really nerding out about it. First kind of developing a love for it through just going, with my friends to cafes and like finding that love through like being part of like community, rather than kind of specifically like in the consumer, like sort of, purchasing bags of coffee nature. But, I think for me, specialty coffee has become like a passion and a love because it combines kind of two of my big interest areas, in terms of I've been a volunteer like with various like food justice organizations for many years, and I love that coffee can provide sort of an intersection between um, you know what I am interested in preserving and protecting with our environment and our agricultural systems, and also how I'm interested in the social and labor aspects and how the people are what make the coffee, and how my consumption of it, both in terms of like literally drinking, but also just as a consumer in terms of like coffee media and like being part of the community, how that affects others and networks beyond me.
Oh, that's impressive. Thank you for sharing. Spencer, do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. So I was an undergraduate in Montreal, and I kind of got into cafe culture there, sort of, very loosely. I don't know, was this about 20 years ago? And I just was interested in that kind of culture. And I was very, when I was doing my undergrad, I was very kind of disillusioned with corporations. And I came back home to the States here, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I think Starbucks was the first time I had heard of corporate social responsibility. And that kind of got me interested in, well, what can company, the idea of doing good by doing well, or doing well by doing good, sorry. And that kind of sent me off into doing an MBA. I did kind of a thesis on corporate social responsibility. And ultimately, I was a casualty of the Great Recession, went back and started doing my PhD in marketing. And as I was doing my PhD, I started my dissertation. I was moving from the corporate side of social responsibility to the consumer side of it. And I was interested in consumer sustainability and purchasing behaviors and why consumers do or do not make purchases that are either environmentally sustainable or socially sustainable. And when I started my dissertation work, I was still kind of standing for Starbucks. And at that point, one of the Starbucks that I was writing out of, they kind of, there was a shop that opened across the street from them. And it was in a small town in Western Massachusetts. And they were serving counterculture, and I didn't really know much about specialty coffee at that point. And I went across the street and basically never went back to Starbucks. And since then, I moved out about 7 years ago to the greater Boston area and met George Howell when I was looking for a specialty coffee place. Didn't even know who he was. And ever since then, I've just been kind of learning more and more about specialty coffee, and it has coincided with my own research on consumer sustainability. So it's kind of dovetailed my career path with my, hobby interest on the side. So it kind of goes hand in hand.
Well, that's really, really cool. So now that we know each other, we know the audience, we have a wider spectrum. So we are going to ask questions to you. And if you have a question for the panelist, please type it on the Q&A section, and we will make sure to ask it for you. So let's start, guys. I'm going to share our...
Okay. So, our presentation is called Is It Just Caffeine? The Customer, What Makes the Customer Choose You? And we're super excited to be here today. Everyone, I think such a time as this, like that right now, we're all like in the mindset of like, we're home baristas, most of us. We're trying to like make the world a better place. We have this like pause and what's the easiest way. And a lot of times for people in the industry, I'm always like preaching to people like, what's in this cup? This is like, I'm super excited to be a part of this, and maybe we can give people some insight on how we can get everyone to agree with us, or give us some like insight on how we can make what's in their cup better for them, and we can all feel good about what we're choosing. And so that is exciting.
Okay, so let's start with the questions.
Yeah. There we go.
Okay, so how did you become coffee lovers? So you have talked a little bit of the intersection with your jobs, but can you like describe more of that moment where you came to the realization, like that aha moment, where it was like, oh, it's coffee, it's different. I see smiles on all of your faces.
Sure, I'll jump in and go first. I became a coffee lover when I really began to understand that there were people behind the coffee. Specifically for me, I remember it was Camilo Marizal, a producer from Colombia. And it happened to be that Intelligentsia was roasting his coffee at the time. And it was a special, not a kit, but I think there were 3 different beans that they put in this particular bundle. And so in addition to just having the coffees and the varietals, it also talked about the approach to producing. And so for someone who grew up knowing the name Juan Valdez, being this fictional character, but then understanding that there really is a craftsmanship, there's an art and a science to producing, and that what I'm tasting in the cup is not by accident or happenstance, but it really is about understanding the processing and the harvesting and all of those pieces, and then the roasting. And so I became fascinated at the stories that sat behind the bean. And so in many ways, the way I would think about, when I used to listen to vinyl, and sometimes still do, you have the album and then you have the liner notes, right? So you're listening to the music, but you're also drinking in the story. That when I realized with coffee, you could do that yes, you could learn about the producers, you could learn their stories, you could understand their approaches, if they were multi-generational, if they were trying something different, if they were incorporating something from a different industry, if they were just new and bringing a curiosity to it. That's when I really became a coffee lover, because as much as I love the beverage, and I do, I find that at this point in my coffee career, I buy from a lot of the same producers over and over again, because even though I'm steps away, I feel like the relationship I'm developing is not simply with the roaster, but the producer, him or herself, year over year. So that's a little bit of how I came to be a coffee lover.
So when you gain that understanding that it's not just the beverage, that's something behind it, that's someone behind it.
Right.
Okay, interesting. Sally, do you want to add to this question?
I would say I definitely agree there. The stories, especially like I'm someone who writes as a hobby, and also like as a volunteer for a couple of organizations, and I always want a narrative, right? Like I want to know where things are coming from and where they're going and how I fit into that. And I think beyond just learning about kind of the production chain and who's behind this, like at the farms, it's also, I became a coffee lover because, coffee shops were where I was going with friends. Like it became like part of like how I built community. And kind of culminated in just finding like, I don't know, one shop that I really love, like here close to home, is Coco Cinnamon, and it's led by a Latina woman, and like getting a perspective on coffee that's not just a very kind of I don't know, we have like an odd, like very like white evangelical coffee culture here sometimes in North Carolina. Churches kind of build up coffee shops, and getting something that's a little closer to the production and the taste and like what makes that important. That was what was compelling to me.
That's very interesting. Spencer, do you want to add?
I think I think both. I think the three of us have some, similarities in the way that we operate. I mean, I have kind of elements that Brian's story and Sally's story that kind of are in my own. I think that part of it was looking for the community element of it. The shop that I had mentioned in Western Mass, it was kind of in that community. It was a very local culture. And so having a shop that kind of community would come in and know of, and even though they had just opened, it was like it had been there for a while. But also getting, into understanding the stories. As I said, one of the things that I, as a consumer researcher, find interesting is the idea that how consumers are drawn to stories, how consumers are drawn to narratives, and going to the shop that had counterculture was the first time that I had heard of relationship coffee or direct trade coffee, or, whatever we want to call the name du jour of that type of element to it, which was clearly different than the commodity markets that I had been used to. And that was kind of the real draw for me, was understanding like this had come from someone on the other side of this that was more than just bringing it to an auction market and selling it for whatever they could make it, for. And here was now another kind of richer side to the story. And when I met George, it was one of the first times I had started to hear about what it was like on a farm, what it was like on an estate, what it was like for the coffee to actually, get to me. And he had personally, had some of these relationships with farmers that, when he started in the 70s, his Mamuto, coffee was well known, because it was an exclusive to him. And he could describe his relationship with the Mathigo family. And it was something that I had never heard anybody speak of coffee like that. And it was different for me in a way that brought the community together in his shop. That just kind of was like, oh, this is not just a beverage, but this is a way that people enter their daily lives to somewhere else, and somebody else in this world. And that was kind of what did it for me.
Wow. Yeah. I like the combination of everything, because it becomes like this place where you connect with people, you rest. It's like a shelter, comfy place, but still it is a place that provides connection to something very different from you, a different world. Very interesting.
So, wow, all of your stories really speak to not only what made me interested in specialty coffee, because, I think like Spencer, like I was used to the commodity version, like, I had a very structured idea of what coffee was. And then being in it, all of these stories are what has like made me feel like this industry is my home. And I'm just interested on what really piqued your interest in specialty coffee, because like there's coffee and then there's like specialty coffee, and it's really has this connotation of like we're very like pinkies up about everything. And I've felt that like in my experience, it's valuing the narrative and valuing from seed to cup the value, seeing that value in that effort. And Spencer, I'd love to hear from you about like, what really piqued your interest.
Yeah, so you mentioned value, Sydney, and I think that that is, as a marketer, as a consumer researcher, that's probably one of the things that most interests me, is the idea that value throughout the specialty coffee chain very much differs. There's a level of intimacy throughout it that is different from commodity markets. And you know, as like I said, as a person, as a consumer researcher who's interested in sustainability, understanding specialty coffee and the difference between that and commodity markets, and even kind of between that and fair trade coffee, for example, was one of the first things that I had seen from as an academic, saying, okay, there are shades to how well we can do for other people. Now, I know I recognize as both a researcher and as a consumer that it's not a perfect industry. It's certainly, there are areas where there are improvements up and down the value chain that need to be made. And, you know, that critique can kind of, you know, be, you know, put aside for a second. But I think part of that critique is looking at this and saying consumers very much know that they're getting Folgers or they're getting something that's fair trade certified. And they kind of have this level of, okay, here's one versus here's the other. They don't all know that there's kind of the potential for another layer to that. And I think that's where specialty coffee lies, or at least the promise of specialty coffee lies, is that there is another layer on, not just in terms of the quality of the cup, but also in terms of the who's behind the cup, whether it's the barista at the front, you know, in the shop, whether it is the roaster, whether it is the importers or the exporters that we don't necessarily know, or, you know, not all of us know as consumers, and then there's the farmers, and that potential for doing better and getting a better cup, I think, is something that is what interests me the most as both a researcher and as a consumer.
Anyone else have something to add to that? Brian, Sally?
You know, I'll say quickly, and I would have struggled to answer the question, but Spencer, when you said intimacy, that really, really resonated, because, you know, specialty is, when we think about, you know, the farm to table movement, right? The idea that you want to get to know not simply the restaurant or the chef, but you want to know the farms from which the food products are coming that are on the table. Specialty coffee, because of the intimacy, and admittedly, sometimes it's a real intimacy between the producer, the importer, the exporter, and the roaster, and sometimes it's not real. So part of the work that as consumers, you know, again, as you mature as a consumer along the spectrum, you get to the point where you really try and sniff that out. But it is that intimacy where, you know, I have the ability to learn more about this producer. You know, you know, as Spencer mentioned, the Matagou's Mamuto that I've been drinking from George Howell, that's the only Kenyan coffee that I drink at this point, because it just is so good. But it is this idea that there is a level of transparency that enables me to go from, right, you think about commodity coffee as a caffeine delivery system, or this delivery vehicle, to the idea of a craft beverage. And if you're going to enjoy a craft beverage, the same way we want to get to know the winemaker or the brewmaster, know that, yes, I want to know the roaster, but also knowing the producer, again, him or herself, you know, and what they're bringing to this is what made specialty coffee special.
Okay. So you say that one of the things that as a consumer helps you filter those coffees that are real relationships and that you can connect with is to find the same producer or the same name through different years.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a big thing for me, Salome. At this point, I probably buy consistently from about 4 or 5 different roasters. And interestingly enough, and we have some wonderful roasters here in Brooklyn, but the majority of the coffee that I buy from different roasters throughout the country, and then some throughout the world, because I'm looking for specific producers. Even the way that I came to know about Caravela through George Howell was because George Howell was roasting Mauricio Chatta's coffees. And when George didn't have them on the menu, I started saying, are there ways for me to go and find his coffees being offered by other roasters? And so now that I do that with Mauricio's coffee, I do it with La Palma's coffee, I do it with Las Lajas in Costa Rica. You know, there are a number of different producers that I just follow their coffees, and then it introduces me to different roasters. So even during this quarantine period, I've ordered coffee from Singapore, I've ordered coffee from Qatar, I've ordered coffee from the UK, because they have the coffees of the producers. And so that, again, it along where I am in the journey, right? Because all consumers are not the same. But so for me, as opposed to the roaster, there are some anchor roasters. Or then again, another example is that there are two roasters that both had Las Lajas, the natural and the honey process. And so I bought both processes from both roasters to be able to kind of put them in conversation with one another to see how they're different.
I love
Those
that.
are the customers that we want.
Yeah. I think like when I was trained as a barista, like I was given this feel of like, we're not competitors because no one drinks one cup of coffee. And even though that hasn't really been realized in how kind of the industry functions with each other, but like having conversations like these and like having information, and I was never really like thought about the importer until this stage in my career and like working with Caravela and like understanding that like, no, we really aren't competitors, and I would buy multiple bags. And, you know, like, and it's important to share these stories because a relationship is more than just like, you know, I mean, not all relationships, but valued relationships are more than just like one interaction, you know? So like you want to see each other's kids grow up and stuff like that. So I want to see like 2 years from now, you using that farm, you know? Sally, do you have anything?
Yeah.
That's interesting, like, you know, metaphor. You want to see someone's kids grow up, like, you know, because I think, like, you know, some of my interests, like, echoes, you know, what these guys are saying. But I just, like, that made me think of a very, like, local experience, like, seeing, like, Black and White, like, take off, and the past couple of years, like, start roasting. There were definitely, like, so I live very close to their first shop, and, you know, go there, and then their first, like, you know, few months of being open, you know, everything, like, it was all interesting, but there were definitely some times where I'd say something and be like, that is funky. Like, what are they doing? Like, what, you know, where is this coming from? But then, like, the next year, like, see, like, you know, the same name on a label, like, see them, like, roasted again, like a different profile maybe, or, you know, something else is going on, like, you know, in terms of like climate or seasonality, where it was coming from. And it was a totally different experience. And like keeping myself open to those experiences and seeing how things evolve and change, like, that's one check mark in the column for like why I keep coming back to specialty coffee.
I think one thing that's interesting, because this has kept kind of sticking in my head since you mentioned them, Sally, was cocoa cinnamon, and this kind of relates to sort of what you know that them and what Brian's story was. We had gotten a cat about a year ago, and I'm not a cat person, and my compromise was I got to name the cat. And so I named the cat Ukro. And if you're familiar with Ukros, comes from Ethiopia. And so this year was the first year since the harvest that I decided to kind of go on a radical experiment, and I've been buying Ukro since it landed on shore, back in April. And as a matter of fact, Little Waves was the first one that I had found, the first roaster that I had found to have it. And it was very interesting because I didn't really know anything about them, but through kind of my journey, I have gotten, this is my 22nd roaster of Ukro. I've been basically drinking Ukro for like 5 months straight now. And, but it has been kind of interesting because I've gotten to know all these other roasters around the country, and that I had not known about Little Waves or Cocoa Cinnamon, and being their mission. And at that point, they were starting buying 205, selling 205 bags a day to be able to support their crew and make sure that, they were able to be paid living wages. And all of a sudden it was like, through this journey, I've learned about different roasters around the country from the same, kind of like what Brian said, from the same one coffee with 22 roasters. Actually, I've got another 3 in my freezer, including Black and White. but it has been interesting for me to kind of come across all these roasters in different areas of the country that I didn't know. And in some respects, that kind of even not closes, but it kind of brings me a little bit closer to other areas of the country that I don't necessarily get to just by virtue of getting to understand their their areas that they operate in. And so I think it was kind of, when you said cocoa cinnamon, and it just kind of stuck with me, because it was like, wow, I would have never have heard of them if, I had not bought, and if I had not named my cat Ukro.
So that's great, because you were following the coffee, and that what tells us as someone that's in the middle of the coffee industry, like closer to roasters, closer to producers, and now listening to this, it just reaffirms our belief that consistency throughout the years with the coffees helps establish stronger relationships with the consumers. But it is not only the roaster, the one that gets benefit from that is the producer. Because consistency on purchasings to a coffee producers only creates certainty for them. So it reduces their risk. If they have certainty on what they will deliver or sell, even if it is just part of their harvest, it reduces their risk, so that it is a sustainable way of buying coffee or moving coffee around, which is really, really nice to hear. And well, this takes me to the next question. So what is important for you when you're buying coffee? We already know that you are looking for consistency, that you are following the coffees and seeing how the roaster present the coffees year after year. But which other things are important when you're deciding to buy coffee?
For me, I would say, I don't know, like I feel like my experience is maybe like a little bit different, like maybe being on like more of a budget. I find that novelty is important for me in buying coffee. Like I want to try as many new things as I can and like expand like, my coffee palette and get to experience new things. So I'm not necessarily looking at, tracking down all the different roasters of a specific like farmer, like regions or co-ops coffee. I'm more, I'll be in a grocery store or a multi-roaster shop, or, just happen across like, a new brand on Instagram, and maybe the label looks really cool, and sometimes that's what actually sells the coffee to me. I'm just like, oh, this seems neat and I haven't tried it, let me do this one.
Well, I would say,
Yeah, that presence. Sorry, continue, please.
I think for me, one of the things that I look for, quite frankly, is it's the price that I'm paying. I recognize that, and again, fully recognizing that, and what works well in my household is that my wife also thoroughly enjoys a good cup of coffee, as do the kids. So I'm allowed to splurge a little bit in these areas. But the price that I'm paying, because if I'm paying too little for a bag of coffee, ultimately, and I can't remember who said this, so I can't credit the right person, but if you're paying, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 for a bag of coffee, someone's being exploited. And so you have to be aware of that. So that's one of the things. I want to make sure I'm properly compensating the entire value chain, because there are a lot of hands through whom that coffee passes. Like Sally, I tend to like a lot of funky, wild varietals. I love natural processes. I love honey processes, these experimentals. So I also watch the varietals. I have some varietal preferences. One of those that's really funky and weird is Whoosh Whoosh. I happen to love Whoosh Whoosh. A lot of the Ethiopian landrace coffees are really interesting. Then the classic, really good Tipika is one that I was turned on to, and so continue to kind of follow that one. That's a good one. So the varietal is a big piece. Region is also big, important. Origin, I drink more Colombian coffee than any other region. because even within, right, we talk about Colombian coffee, but there are so many different regions within a country. And then even within a particular growing region, there are so many variations. So I feel like I'm just kind of still exploring a single region and just going through layers and layers. So origin is also important. The producer is important. And then the relationship. Because of things, the advent of social media and things like that, I can not simply look at the roaster's feed, but for producers who have the ability to have that presence as well, I can check their feed and I can see, what they've got going on, what they're talking about, what they're excited about, what's come to harvest. And so that's the other thing that I'll use to try to drive my purchase decisions.
I'd say I'm kind of a little bit of both again. I think that a conversation like this is really interesting because it kind of highlights how much similarities I think we do have in the way that we are very interested in the product, the relationships, who gets what out of this. And I think I'm kind of very similar. Sometimes it's the label, sometimes it's the region, sometimes it's the processing. I think for me, like I said, one of the things that got me into specialty coffee was the sustainability element of it and trying to figure out what is sustainability. I mean, I think a lot of us think of sustainability, and I certainly, in my day job, as a university professor, talk about this with students in terms of what sustainable marketing is. And sustainable marketing is not just about the environment, of which part, that is a part of, but it is also about the social element of it as well. And Brian touched on the fact that, there are many hands that go, through which the coffee goes. And I think for me, recognizing those different elements and, what, not just who is handling it and how it's handled, but where it's handled and how those different parts of the story relate to it. I mean, we are kind of looking at one end of it, which is us being able to buy a bag of coffee, for retail consumption. And then we're also often looking at the other element of it, or the other end of it, which is the farmer. And kind of saying, okay, what about the people in the middle? And Sally, you had mentioned this in terms of kind of the economic, racial justice elements of baristas on the front line, for example. And I think that's important as well, to acknowledge that there are people kind of in the other elements of the chain where we recognize what value that they're contributing to it and what kind of justice needs to be looked at in those elements. And that's a large part of my research, looks at how consumers kind of look at justice in their decision-making processes, how consumers look at fairness in their decision-making processes. And it's not just always fairness to the farmer, but fairness to other elements and other intermediaries in the value chain who do contribute to that value, and what kind of fairness are they receiving as well. And so part of that is that's important to me as well. It's not just economic, it's not just environmental, but there's also the social components to it.
So we know, and you guys have spoken about how you, not only does every coffee have a story, but you remember them, which is really interesting to hear, because a lot of times, sometimes people feel from like a marketing standpoint that they're like throwing spaghetti on the wall and they're just giving out information, and people aren't really like taking it in and valuing it. And so that's really exciting. So thank you for sharing that with us. And my question would be, where should the story start to make you interested in a particular coffee? Like, is the introduction the origin, or is the introduction the process, the funky process, or like, is it something new, or is it something like an old staple that you have? So I'm curious if anyone wants to begin answering that. Where is the first step in our coffee story to make you like really intrigued and be willing to purchase it? Sally, I see you thinking.
Yeah, I am thinking, because I'm trying to think like what I kind of, first look for, like on a label, or what might attract me to a particular like roaster.
Let me set the scene for you. So like I tend to buy my coffee at 3 a.m. in the morning. Insomnia, and I'm scrolling, and like let's say you're scrolling and you see a coffee, and you're like, well, I need to buy some coffee because clearly I'm going to need it tomorrow or today, whatever. And what's the first thing that like draws you? Like for me, like sometimes it's tasting notes because I love a funky fruit berry coffee moment. But other times it's like, oh, like let me go to this particular. Do you search out particular roasters, or do you search out different? When you're like, okay, I need to like re-up my coffee stash.
So I feel like my story, like what gets me interested in particular coffee, like starts with recommendations from my friends. Like, I hear about a different roaster either in two main contexts. Okay, so one would be like, oh, I had this amazing coffee from them. It's like blah, blah, blah process, or it had this really like odd tasting note, like humility or some, like some like really like odd marketing thing that like caught the eye. The other thing that tells me about whether I'm going to be interested in coffee or not is, oh, my friend worked for this company and they did XYZ. And that can either be a very bad thing or a very good thing. Like, can definitely like lead me to never want to have coffee from this particular like source again, or become a really devoted customer because I know that they've been like writing for their employees. And so, yeah, like for me, like it comes back to the people too, like knowing how, on any side or either like end of the chain, like how folks are like being affected by the creation of this coffee.
I like that.
So I think if you'll allow me to geek out a little bit, and I feel okay doing this because Spencer, you started this. But so by day, I work in management consulting, and we're constantly working with frameworks. And one of the frameworks we often work with is a maturity model. And the idea is that not all companies are in the same place with a particular capability. So when we talk about the coffee story and the point of entry or the point of introduction, it depends upon where that particular consumer is in their experience. Because what I'm attracted to now in the story is going to be very, very different from what attracted me 13 years ago. When I think about 13 years ago, it was the idea that, again, that coffee is not something that's made in a factory that's then put in a can and sold on a shelf that's been on that shelf for who knows how long. But it's the idea that it is the seed of a cherry. It's a living thing that was cultivated, produced. And then, right, coffee is not, there is not a coffee flavor, right? I think that's some of the great mismarketing around coffee, is that coffee is this very monolithic thing. So the idea of the dynamism and the spectrum of coffee's flavor profile. Our family has au pairs, and we've had a number of au pairs from Colombia. And one of my favorite memories is sitting down with Sarita in particular, and who's from Colombia. And so we're drinking Colombian coffees, but flavors that she hadn't necessarily experienced before. And so we're discovering these together. Versus, and I think, but now, again, at this part of the experience where I am, it is, I'm super interested in all of the pieces, in the producer, and so understanding why they're growing what they're growing, again, what they're excited about, what they're experimenting with. It means a lot to me about the importers and the exporters. All of a sudden, B Corp certification is something that I'm looking at right now, because again, is everyone treating their respective networks well? So being able to meet the people, because I think for me, and I'll wrap it up with this, loyalty for me isn't to the product, it's to the people. And so the more I have the opportunity to learn about the people, the more loyal I become to the product itself. I think about the roasters from whom I buy consistently, because it's a personality, right? It's not a company. It's because I can't really be loyal to a company. So at this point in my coffee buying experience, where I have an opportunity through social media, something, but to develop that relationship of some extent, that's where I can learn about that, and I can inquire and engage a little bit. That's the thing that really keeps me interested and holds on to my interest and my buying commitment.
Great. Okay, then I'll move to the next question, which is basically understanding that the trends change and your interests change through the time. So, well, we know on Brian, at your side, how that has changed, and well, you have become more and more involved with coffee. But what about you, Sally and Spencer? How has that interest changed while you become more involved with the specialty coffee?
I think
Oh,
as I learn more about specialty coffee, as I consume more, I think what's changed is that I question more the information that I'm getting about the coffee. You know, like we, especially, I feel like maybe it was like Chris McCauley with Get You Some Gear that like kind of brought this to my attention, but thinking about these sort of mission trip pictures and narratives that kind of come along with a lot of coffee marketing, especially kind of like origin trip sort of things, like seeing the lens that we're presented to look at coffee through. And I've become to realize more that I need to question like who's behind the camera, who's giving me this information about the coffee. And it kind of goes back to I think it was Brian who mentioned like farm to table narratives, right? Like, you know, kind of the way that coffee gets marketed. And I mean, it's an agricultural product, of course, so like there's going to be some overlap there, but like farm to table, you know, kind of, you know, became like a huge way of selling agricultural products to consumers. But you think about then, I think it was maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, a newspaper in Tampa, like even like won like a Pulitzer for revealing like the kind of deceptiveness in their farm to table restaurant industry, like marketing, like how like everything was sort of still coming on the same trucks. Like you could just slap like whatever label on it and there's really no certification, there's no outside force like really telling you like, you know, what place something is coming from, how the people are being treated, and like why the price point is the way that it is, like for, you know, whether that's super high or super low. And so as I learn more, I realize more what I don't know, I guess is how I would sum that up.
okay.
I think
Yeah,
there are kind of
very interesting.
there are kind of three things that I think that I've learned change something as I've gotten more involved. First is you know, going around to different, you know, parts of the country, and then I had an opportunity for a research project. I was in Australia for 2 weeks a couple of years ago, and the coffee scene, specialty coffee scene there was totally different than what I would see in the US, both in terms of the industry itself, in terms of the attitudes towards the industry by the consumers there, the types of consumers themselves. And I realized that coffee consumption, I think it was kind of eye-opening, you know, to talk about coffee there versus coffee here. I would kind of open up with, you know, conversations with baristas, and they were just not the same as they were here. They just kind of, I said when I came back, imagine it like the footprint of Starbucks, but everybody was their own individual unique shop. I said, and in each of those shops was good quality coffee. I said, that was a very different kind of dynamic than what I had experienced here, where in Boston, maybe I could say there was 3, 4, and maybe now 5 shops that I could tell somebody to maybe go to visit. If I was to go to Chicago, I would, do something. I'd maybe know 4 or 5 shops, but there it was like one city. There was like, I had visited in 2 weeks, more than 16 shops. That was number one. Number two is I think it highlights kind of the difference in the issues that are there. In Australia, the baristas were paid a living wage, and it was not seen as a job that was, to be looked down upon. It was looked at, as kind of everybody else is doing their kind of position there. And so when you come back here, it was like, okay, well, really, what are we doing in the local area, in the local shops for specialty coffee, and what are we contributing there, recognizing that a lot of the value of specialty coffee is not, necessarily produced in the producing coffee, in the producing countries. And so why is that, symmetry in value of coffee asymmetric relative to where coffee is being consumed? So what kinds of issues, and I look at this even recently in the last year, is the way that the people that I'm looking, on Instagram, coffee influencers in the US, how are they contributing to the conversation? What are they contributing to? We look at that a lot with racial justice, particularly, and that's kind of influenced how I've kind of seen where coffee has been in the last couple of, in the last year or so, in terms of where I'm buying from and whom I'm buying from. I think like the Amethyst out in Denver, and the kinds of things that they've been advocating for, and think, okay, what kinds of roasters in the US are doing things, very similarly to them and putting out messages like them. And then the third thing is, I think for me, is kind of looking at how do I become more involved with the industry as a whole, as being somebody who's an outsider. Brian, you mentioned earlier, kind of, you kind of used the word, my career in coffee. And the funny thing is I don't think we don't have coffee careers. We're kind of, as your new Instagram handle puts it, coffee adjacent. Right. And so I look at how do I deal with, or how do I bring that adjacency in the things that I know, the things that I research, the things that I do, in class with my undergraduates. How do I bring that into back into the fold for specialty coffee? I've kind of toyed with the idea of, I know, I teach marketing principles to undergraduates, and I could certainly teach the entire marketing principles course to coffee professionals from a coffee lens based on what I know about coffee and what I know about marketing. So is there a way that I can contribute that back to the industry and be able to provide, coffee professionals some of that kind of education that I would otherwise, am doing, as part of my job. And the other thing is I look at it and say, okay, well, there are a lot of researchers and academics that the industry works with in agronomy, in supply chain, in forest and agriculture. But how can I bring what I do kind of as the dirty word of business? How do I bring that into, in my lens of that, into that? For instance, I think that specialty coffee needs to be more defined in what its purpose is, what its definition is. I think that there are a lot of things that specialty coffee encompasses that are not well defined by how I, as an academic, would look at it. In academia, we're all about trying to come up with definitions, and even if we disagree on them, we can start with them as the basis of what we do next. And I think that there's a lot of definition that specialty coffee needs to move to the next step in terms of what it is, what it does, and what it can do for other people, besides just consumers, but bringing consumers as one stakeholder in the process back into that value chain. So I kind of look at it kind of those 3 different dimensions. I don't know about the rest of you folks. I'll be quiet now. So you get a professor talking and they'll just talk forever. So.
No, I find it very, very interesting, because in my mind, I'm starting to build this idea. And I'm really happy with what Sally and you, Spencer, said on how you become more critical with the information you're receiving. and how one of the filters to filter and evaluate if you want to be loyal to a company is seeing how committed it is with the local community, the local employee, the local causes that are very important, because that also tell you that it is more likely that the company is going to be committed throughout the chain for the whole sustainability and relationship. I think that that's very, very impressive. And it's very important to take that into account, because sometimes we only focused on coffee. So how does the coffee taste? Like, what's the best coffee? This is how we're going to market the coffee, but it is not just about the coffee, but the whole company. The marketing, how it is presented, how the coffee or the company itself presents itself and connects, but also how it impacts locally, and it presents in a way that it is easy to understand for a consumer. So I really, really am enjoying this. Let's move to the next question.
And I think we've all kind of like touched on this, on like what makes you repurchase a coffee and what makes you try something new. We've definitely, spoken to those for everyone, and it's just kind of like, from what I've picked up, it's like you value how you value these roasters and different participants in the chain by how much they value the other people in the chain, and that's really beautiful, and adds to the intimacy that is specialty coffee.
Yeah.
And so, if there's anything else, like if there's anything else you want to add to that, let me know. Like, what makes you become a repeat purchaser? Um, and if anybody wants to add anything else, because you guys have really like communicated your mindset. Like, I feel I feel like I have a deeper understanding of an industry, and I think it kind of speaks to how the consumer is a part of that value chain. Like, we have to value you with honesty and transparency and good quality product, and you will value us. And it can all work better if we just value each other just a little bit more. So if anyone wants to speak to that or add anything else, please let me know.
Just I'll say here two quick things. What makes me repurchase a coffee? It comes from having a good experience with it. There are several producers now from whom I've bought for the last 3, 4, 5 years. Right? There's a stable of coffees that come through. What makes me try something new? Again, it may be a varietal that's new to me. I think like Bernardino was one that I just purchased from Proud Mary's Coffee, just because I'd never heard of it before. I was like, oh, that's new. But the other thing is, and it's a bit of a trend that I've seen from a couple of roasters, Passenger Coffee specifically is one, Onyx is another, where I'm able to buy smaller bags. So I can buy a 4-ounce or a 5-ounce bag of coffee, because a 12-ounce bag of coffee is a pretty significant commitment. And so when it comes to trying something new, it is both the coffee itself, but also a lowering of the barrier to entry. So I can just explore it. I don't have to make that full-on commitment. And then if it's something that I like, I can go and repurchase it a larger quantity. So that's a trend that I've seen at some roasters that I would love to see expand, because I think it would encourage more consumers to try more things.
I like, before COVID, we were able to go to travel for conferences more often. And, I kind of do my diligence before I would go to a city and kind of find where and it was always a joke, because I would say people go to pub crawls, across cities, and I would do a cafe crawl. And I'd get up in the morning before going to sessions, and I'd go to 4 or 5 shops, wherever it was. And one of the last conferences I went to was in Washington, D.C. And I went to, I think, three or four shops there. And that conference is allegedly going to be back in DC next year if we have conferences still. It went virtual this year. So, but the thing is having been there, you know, I kind of knew which ones, you know, I thought the 3 that I went to were pretty good, that I would otherwise go back there next time and be able to, you know, have a repeat experience with them because I enjoyed what, you know, I had while I was there. You know, the same goes for a couple of the other cities like well, I haven't been to San Francisco in a while, but Chicago certainly, right? You can go back and you can say, okay, well, here's where I would go. And I know that I had a good experience here. I know that I had good coffee here. Oftentimes I'll walk in and what's kind of weird is you as a non-coffee as a non-coffee professional walking in and having a sort of a vocab to talk to people with, and you know the equipment that they're working with and all those kinds of things, and you just kind of have these conversations that you can come back to later on. And even we were away on vacation, and I've seen, you know, Instagram feeds where I've seen that barista, and I know that barista because I had a conversation with that barista while I was there on vacation. And it's crazy that I was on vacation a year ago there, and that barista, like, I could walk into the shop now and have that relationship with them, maybe not an intimate, you know, more than I was there for, but I can have that relationship with them to come back and say, oh yeah, I was here last year and we were talking about this coffee, and you know, you had recommended this, and I went home and I had it and it was really good. And those are the kind of things that, you know, I will come back and say, what, you know, in terms of what can you recommend to me this time? I oftentimes will go by whatever the person behind the counter is suggesting and why they suggest it, rather than just, you know, oh, I necessarily like this. Part of the relationship with me is for that reason, is to get new information, to seek out new things from other people's recommendations, because I trust what they have to say, you know, beyond just, oh, I'm just gonna, you know, buy the thing that I already know. I like to go by what other people's recommendations are. So.
Okay. You want to add something, Sally?
I think they both touched on, like, I would just be echoing what they said, so.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. Okay, here comes the question. We have learned tons from you guys. But have you influenced your friends and family? Because we hear from all of you that recommendations are important for you and your decision making when purchasing coffee. So, have you influenced your family and friends, Sally?
Yeah, so in different ways. I think, you know, most of my friends work within the coffee industry or have at some time, so I don't know that I'm necessarily winning over any hearts and minds there. But with family, I feel like it's a little bit generational. Like, so I'm from the mountains, and definitely like grew up with coffee being like something that you just bought what was cheapest, and it was something that was just fuel. And maybe if you handed like your cup to Granny, she would read your coffee grounds and, you know, did weird witchy stuff with it. But otherwise, like, it was just to get you to work and like have in a diner and move on. And so like when it comes to my mom and dad, my mom's still using like individual K-cups. Like sometimes I feel like she's a lost cause. But with my sister, you know, like I've been able to like, you know, take her to places and like have her try actual coffee and not just stuff that's like full of like 16 pumps of syrup and things like that. And like she, you know, she texted me the other day, she's like, you ruined my budget because now I have to like buy actual, you know, actual good coffee rather than like throwing in this Maxwell House thing. So yeah, I think it, you know, it comes down to like being able to share with people. Some, you know, some people are not going to be open to it, like, you know, whether that's like budget wise or just culturally wise or whatever, but, you know, definitely have gotten maybe her on board, maybe a couple other people. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And I do see that cultural and generational thing being very important. It happens to me inside of my family. They are coffee lovers, especially my mom. Um, we have improved the quality of the coffee, not like her coffee lover face, but we have definitely improved the coffees that she drinks at home. And my father is more into it. But my mom is the coffee drinker. But I see that it is really hard to convince like the generation before me to come in and make the change. I just have to do like subtle change, something slowly and easy, just like step by step. But with people my age, um, oh, it has been really easy. And people's like, no, like your sister, now we have to spend in good coffee. Where do I buy that coffee that you gave me? And things like that. So it is very interesting. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
I
So
think
do
one,
you guys
I
want to
think
ask?
one question is where you influence friends and family as well. I think that a lot of them are more easily influenced at point of consumption than they are elsewhere.
Yeah.
If you can bring somebody, so I mentioned, doing cafe crawls. Oftentimes I would bring some of my colleagues with me, to one or two shops, and then the light bulb goes off. But if I just have a conversation about it, then basically now they're just like, oh well, he's kind of geeking out about it, and that's not really the place where the influence is sustained. you know the same thing with your sister. My wife's not really a specialty coffee, person or anything like that. I'm the opposite of Brian, whose wife is okay with it. Mine just didn't really care. But one of the things that Passenger was doing was they were doing necessary coffee, which was kind of some of the lots that were not necessarily, 88, 89 point lots that were otherwise, having to recognize that farmers still and other, value contributors needed to be paid. One of the things I started doing was I started buying my wife necessary coffee instead, because she doesn't care about, the experimental stuff or interesting, right? And we recognize that people have different tastes in coffee in that regard. But by buying her that, she is okay with that kind of coffee, and I feel better because I know that the value is still being contributed along the coffee chain. And so there are other ways I think of bringing that influence in ways that are not necessarily like hit them over the head, but are ways to again contribute that value, that specialty, or at least the promise and potential that specialty coffee has to offer.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And then I might add, I think it's the experience of coffee is one of the ways I think I've been able to have influence. So strangely enough, though I live in Brooklyn, I don't really have a shop that I go to on a regular basis. The majority of the coffee that I drink, I brew at home. So right when people used to be able to come to my house in the pre-COVID world, everyone knew when they came to the house, I was going to make coffee. And for dinner or after dinner, everyone knew they were going to have a coffee and a mezcal, because that's kind of that was kind of the end of the evening. So the idea that coffee can fit into so many different contexts, right? It's not just the thing you have in the morning or the preparation of it. Again, as a consultant and a bit of a tinkerer, the ritual of brewing is something I thoroughly enjoy. So a lot of friends and family get a kick of simply how I prepare it, because it's so very different from the way that they drink coffee. So the idea that there's this experience around it and there's this culture around it, and it's bigger than just this, right? It's this go juice, but that there really is this this history, this cultural context, this intentionality about coffee. I think that's one of the ways that I've influenced. So even though they may not necessarily buy what I'm buying or drink what I'm drinking, they've come to recognize that there's something very special about it and that it is to be respected, right? That again, it's that the person on the production side, it is a crafts person. This is someone who has a skill and a knowledge base that they're using to bring this to bear.
If your friends are respecting you and not laughing at you, I want to switch up our friends and family.
Well, and to be clear, Spencer, they do both. They absolutely do both.
Yeah.
But like when we go on vacation, no one brings coffee because they know that I'm going to bring coffee. So it's just the thing now that everybody just resigns themselves to the fact that I don't need to do that. Brian's going to bring it. Whatever it's going to be is going to be weird and interesting and fun.
I find it very interesting because the ritual and the connection behind I'll brew the coffee for you or I'll take you to the place where I like to go, that's a game changer. But also, for me, in my experience of influencing friends, discovering the friends that are into funky, weird, experimental stuff, and most of the people, being truly honest, most of the people who wants something sweet, clean, and just like comfy coffee for like enjoying it a lot. So when I started like appreciating and being conscious about that difference, then I started influencing a bunch of people, even inside of my family, because it's like, well, you don't like this fruity wild coffee, but I have this other thing for you, and it's like way sweeter, way better. It's like it recreates this like comfy place and space where you want to be, so it becomes part of the ritual. Yeah, that has happened here. Yeah.
Okay, so we've all talked about like the stories and what draws to us. And what really like resonated with me, I kind of think Sally said it, was like being able to decipher genuine connection and genuine between the roaster and the producer and how it's being marketed and with the photos, and et cetera. And I think that this question kind of speaks to that, because one of the indicators that I've personally found of like maybe not the most genuine of relationships being built is how much the information is being shared, and maybe like you got to find the right balance. And I was curious if you all have experienced that same kind of, or if there's an ideal balance of information and, you know, photos and introduction to farmers, or, you know, introduction to like roasters that were created. So what is relevant and what is just like too much information, where you feel like people are just like just filling, just trying to throw anything at you? So do you guys have like a kind of like indicators of like what is relevant and then what is just like, I don't need to know it, or it doesn't add to how I see your relationship?
I think for me personally, it adds to the relationship having that information, and the more information that I have, the more I can kind of use that in my decision making processes. One of the things that I've been trying to figure out as a researcher recently has been how consumers, and we've kind of started. I have a doctoral student working with me, that we're kind of looking at where blockchain kind of comes into this whole thing, in terms of what information is too much and how much, and are consumers even going to use blockchain for making any sorts of decisions about sustainability. I think that there's kind of a risk of information overload, particularly for people who are not necessarily like us, who are not really as interested in, the ethos of specialty coffee, both on the quality and the potential for sustainability, where things go, how to trace it. And then there are those like us who are very interested in it and who are very wanting to know. And I don't want to take this out of you, Brian, but like I love this quote. We had a conversation, Brian and I, several months ago, and he said, if you spend $5 on a cup of coffee, where do those 500 pennies go? And I love that quote, and I come back to it quite often now. Getting into this research has been, what is too much for most people is, that they're spending those 500 pennies. But for people like us, we're very interested, I think, in where those 500 pennies go, who they go to, why they're 500, why these pennies went to these people and not these people, or again, asymmetrically distributed. And so I think that kind of factors into our decision making process certainly differently than some of the other, even specialty consumers, who are not necessarily interested in that, but are more interested in, can I get a cup of coffee that scores 93 points? And I think that kind of balance is different for the different types of specialty coffee consumers.
What I'll add in here is I think it's one of those where it's there's no such thing as too much information, but it's when the information is presented in the experience. I think it's more about the packaging of the information. By that, I mean, if I'm in a shop, how much information is actually on the bag versus if there's a QR code on the bag and I want to learn a little more while I'm still in the shop, can I do that? Versus when I have a little more time and I actually want to visit the website, how can I learn more? So I think when I think about information, I think about it right back to this idea of the maturity model. It depends upon the context I'm in and where I am in my journey, so that if all of the information is there, great. But I may not want all of that at the same time. So just thinking through the different touch points, and making sure that there are appropriate levels of information at each touch point, and that as the relationship grows, I can get more deeply involved in the information, I think is helpful from a consumer perspective.
That's awesome. I love that the QR codes, like consent, like, you know, like that's how I feel. Like, you know, I want to know because I'm nosy and I want to know everything, but like, I want to be able for it to be genuine and not you just like, because I'm a little cynical as well. So like, I want it to be relevant to what I'm experiencing and then give me the option to get a little bit more.
Right.
I love that.
It's kind of fun though to like, so this question just had me thinking, like Sydney and I guess this past summer tried a coffee from Boycott Coffee, that they were doing this line of ungraded coffees that they were roasting and sending out with just blank cards where you could write your impressions, like what you thought the tasting notes were, how your perception of the coffee was, like almost no information other than here's the issue with grading coffee and like how that affects like the price that a farmer is able to get, and like why, like they told you why they did this thing, but then left you with next to no information on what to expect out of the coffee itself. Like you got to come in like tasting blind a little bit, and I loved not having that. Like I loved seeing like what I got out of something, that wasn't already like on a label. So I'm not just looking at it and be like, oh, this does taste like red fruits, like, or whatever. And so sometimes that little, like taking that surprising new approach and maybe leaving out some of the traditional information that we've gotten on a bag can be valuable.
Yeah. It is more about thinking how to present that information. Because, this connects a lot to the marketing and the presence that a company wants to have. Because you can have like the coffees you generally have with the information that you think that like it has to be there, like the name of the producer or the country where the coffee comes from, or if there is like a long relationship or something like that. But if you want to teach your customers, your consumers something, you have to take other things out so your consumer can focus on something that it's your intention to teach or to show. I like
One of
that.
the things you had mentioned before with Sally was talking, when you were talking about narratives and the stories that we tell, and it was kind of interesting. We, having too much information and the relationship and all those kinds of things, we had started to get into that in a study I was running before COVID struck and campus closed and I was no longer able to run the study. But it was basically looking at like whether the same information can be processed in kind of a narrative form and tell the story, if that's more effective in eliciting some sort of response by the consumer rather than just kind of listing these various components. So we were actually starting to get into taking the same exact information and listing it versus writing it out as kind of a story. And the kind of the theory behind that is that in fact consumers are more responsive to that storytelling than that kind of listing of raw information. And so as a result, I think that information presentation certainly is a part of that. winemakers, there's a lot of wine marketing literature that I know, that I'm aware of, and it's not my area of expertise, but I know several of my colleagues who do wine marketing research, and that is an area that I don't think coffee has particularly tapped well, in terms of looking at perceptions of labels, for instance, and what information and how much information. And I know there's been some research by Fabiana Carvalho on perception and sensory perception and colors, but there's a lot of stuff I think that the industry otherwise does not quite have a grasp of in as much maturity as the wine folks do. And I would love to see a little bit more on that, and some partnerships, with people, interested in finding out how consumers are looking at this and making decisions based on that. And that includes the type of information, because I think wine labeling does not have nearly as much information, and yet there is kind of an implicit, well, here's the vintner and this is the vineyards it comes from, and we know that this goes. And I don't know if that's because vineyards are a little bit more local and we have a little bit more understanding than most coffee producing areas. But I'd love to see that more, I think, in the coffee industry is a greater understanding of where consumers are taking this information.
Yeah.
Love that idea.
Food for thought. So we already came into talking about this, the preferred or ideal way to transfer information to customers. With the last question in the conversation we have ongoing, I feel that we already answered this question. But do you guys want to add something here, or shall we move? I think we're pretty covered.
The one quick thing that I might add here, Salome, is I've seen it with a couple of roasters, but the idea that the images that are being used, are you using photographers from origin? The artists who are designing the labels, I saw Queen City Collective do this. They worked with a Colombian artist to do the label for the bag. So as we think about, how to transfer that information. So if we're doing it in written form or image form or even video, as we can see more and more of that produced on the side of origin, to this notion about credibility and authenticity, and even making sure that, right, how do we make sure coffee benefits more and more on the producing side? I think the opportunity to do that in a first person narrative, as opposed to it always being third person. So how can we look at this from the perspective of the producer or others involved in the value chain versus only looking at it through the eyes of the roaster or those on the consuming side, is something I think I've seen. Again, it's a trend I've seen a little bit of, but would like to see more of.
Yeah. Because it only creates this sensation or this perception that you're talking with someone, that someone is telling you the story, that someone is explaining it. And even though you don't have a physical connection, you kind of feel like programmed in that physical connection space where you understand each other when you're listening or reading the other person. I see a lot of value in that, yeah. And I have seen some roasting companies starting to do, not with everything that they do, but with some of their products or even their social media posts, showcasing the people and letting the post to be made and written by someone, not the company itself. And I have seen that those have more response, more engagement. Huh. Last question.
Last question, and I think this really speaks to what we've really been talking about this entire time, is like, are we as a coffee industry transferring knowledge and creating loyal customers? Are we, if we're going to like accept the premise that we're valuing each part of the chain, are we communicating that value effectively and, resulting in being valued, which is, I think, the biggest goal. And if anyone wants to take a stab at this question, how do you feel? How do you feel we're doing so far? I think that Brian spoke, like, where we could go with that, and, like, recognizing that everyone's role in the value chain is not static. So, like, allowing Origin to take ownership of the stories that's being communicated, and not just being like smiling awkwardly in a photo from someone that they don't even know, and like that's translated off. It's just like, okay, I'll take the photo. But like, so anything else, like, do you think, like, would you give us a grade, professor? Would you give us a passing grade? Just be pass or fail? Or do you think that we can all acknowledge that there's room for improvement, but what's like one thing that like could orient us to the next step, the next wave?
I think we're all looking at who's going to go first.
Okay, so I'll go. So I was this just had me thinking, like, not this question had me thinking not about like what might be said on the label or what gets said on the website or Instagram or the stories that we tell, but we really undervalue the role of the barista in transferring knowledge to coffee customers. I was just thinking about like how so many of the things that I've learned about coffee started with asking a barista about it, and like having those conversations in shop, like at the point where I as a consumer am going to consume. Now this is not gonna, in coffee, in different places along the supply chain, like, this is going to be different. But for me, like, someone who's either buying a bag of coffee like at a shop or, having a latte at a cafe, I have a person who I can directly get information from. And it comes down to a lot of like investing in training for baristas and also respecting the knowledge that they have, that I think currently isn't. Some shops are doing it right. Like some shops are investing in their people that way, but a lot of times, it's not like I think Spencer mentioned, like in Australia, like most people are not making a living wage at that spot. In the coffee industry, most people are not able to view it as a sustainable career, and so to transfer knowledge better and to create more loyal customers, you have to meet people where they're at, and who are they meeting first? It's that barista. It's so that would be the biggest area for growth that I could see, like in terms of like where I'm consuming stuff.
Yeah, I would agree. I can think of, knowing George, and having listened to George when he's come into the shop, periodically, he's just mesmerizing to listen to. But so much of what I've learned has been from other stuff. Kind of going through my journey, I've kind of leveled up in my own knowledge as a consumer, but based on like talking to the baristas and so on. And training baristas is important. And one of the things about kind of going to George's shop quite, frequently, I would be down there 2-3 times a week. And it's not necessarily convenient to me in the Boston suburbs, to get downtown, has been trying to get kind of some of the more of that knowledge from them. Whether it's been knowledge about where the coffee's from, how the coffee is brewed, how the coffee, all of the above. I think that the biggest area where, and so, like I said, when I go traveling, I can walk into a shop and have those conversations, and those recommendations that I kind of crave are coming from those baristas. And I've been to a couple of shops in Boston where I asked about XYZ, and the person at the register, and it's not even just the baristas, actually. I think it's people at the register as well. I can tell when the people at the register have been trained as well, not just the baristas. So when I go to the front of the shop and the barista's making drinks down there or whatever, and maybe I can have that conversation while I'm waiting. When I ask what's good on the menu, the person at the register has that knowledge of what's on the menu and how to taste, and how it's brewed and what kind of notes I might be seeking. And I understand that not all the customers, as Brian had said, are at the same place in their journey as me. But when I'm seeking that information out, I expect that the people there are going to have that information, and that includes everybody there. So there's training not just for the baristas, but for everybody in the shop as well, and then paying them a living wage, because that's what their knowledge is. You pay for knowledge, and that's part of that. I think one of the things that specialty coffee kind of the biggest roadblock is getting new consumers into it. We've talked about influencing friends and family. We've talked about like what kind of knowledge you would need, but I think so much of it is getting consumers in the door. The people like us are going to go, into the door. We're on a conversation with Caravela Coffee because we are engaged consumers. We already know a lot of these types of things, and it's not to say we know everything, but it is the people who are coming in off the street who maybe have a choice of, as certainly by me, Dunkin' Donuts, or Starbucks, or, some other place, and recognizing how we get them in the store, as opposed to those brands that they already know. And so I think part of it is getting kind of the entry point into making it less intimidating. Not necessarily, and this kind of goes with what Brian had said earlier. We want the knowledge because we're farther along in a journey and we have kind of more we understand, but making that that part of the journey accessible to get consumers into the door. I think one of the reasons we see kind of those big, specialty shops like Intelligentsia, like Counterculture, like Blue Bottle, and so on, is because they've kind of created that accessibility in their brands, that consumers that don't know sort of these smaller roasters, these smaller outfits that maybe have one or two shops, you don't necessarily know Black and White, you don't necessarily know Ruby out in Wisconsin, you don't necessarily, like all of these types of things where we know that you can still be a shop that brings those people into the door. And so they've kind of worked to bring some of that accessibility, but I think that there needs to be more accessibility to consumers who don't want to be intimidated by it, who, you kind of, I think, mentioned, Sally, sort of like the pinkies up sort of, they're intimidated by consumers like us. And I think that bringing that stumbling block down while still showcasing that you can be a sustainable coffee, you can be quality coffee, that you are still mission oriented. I think that's where there's opportunity for the market to still drive consumers, because I think of the total market, specialty only has like 20% of coffee consumption.
Less.
What? Less?
Way less, yeah.
So there's still
maximum 10%, but it is on the 5% range. Yeah.
Even compared to a decade ago, that number has been significantly expanded, and I think that there's a lot more opportunity. And part of it is through those relationships. I got asked by the SCA, how shops would survive COVID, and I said one of the things that specialty coffee has as an advantage is the fact that it has those relationships that it builds. Yeah. Working to build those relationships is where you start getting people in the door, you start making things accessible, and then you can advance consumers on that knowledge. We all started from somewhere. Like I said, I started going to junkie shops in Montreal and then worked to Starbucks, then to Counterculture, then to George. And so it was a progression for me. And I think every kind of consumer is like that. It's a matter of getting them in the door and recognizing that you don't have to be a pinkies up, coffee person to be engaged in this.
Yes, definitely. It's more of that experience. I agree that as a coffee industry, we need more education on not just the education on the coffee and how it's served or the cupping notes, but we also need more education on understanding what the customer is looking for and being able to look at the customer and separate what the customer wants to satisfy that need, and create this space where customers feel understood. So
That's one of the hardest things as a marketing professor for me to see, and as a consumer to see, is I will sit in George's shop and I will listen to, there's his shop in downtown Boston that gets a lot of tourists coming by. It's adjacent to the hotel. And so a lot of tourists come in from the hotel, and I listen to them talking, and they don't know who George is. They don't know what specialty coffee necessarily is. And I listen to them talking about this as both a coffee consumer and as a professor. And I'm thinking, boy, there's so much stuff out here that George is not hearing about, the way that these people are talking about his coffee or not talking about his coffee. I think a lot of coffee people tend to talk amongst themselves.
yeah.
And I think that the problem with talking to yourselves is you don't understand the consumers you don't have. So understanding the loyal consumer that you want to keep is certainly important, because you want that loyalty, you want that, relationship with that consumer. But it is also a function of talking to the consumers you don't have and who are not coming into your shop, and understanding what they are or are not saying and how that can be leveraged to improve your ability to reach out to them.
Yes, definitely. I think that we are missing that inside of the coffee industry. As I was mentioning at the beginning, we are really tied and connected with each other inside of the industry, but going out and finding new customers and making people fall in love with coffee, it's not as easy. Finding that loyalty is not as easy because we are thinking from the coffee viewer's perspective instead of the coffee consumer's perspective to reach them out. So I think Sydney and I agree that we have learned a lot from you consumers to put into our conversations and the experiences we can have with other coffee people, with other coffee roasters, to all of the learning experiences that we have had today, and that hopefully we will include into the coffee world.
This is great.
So yeah, thank you for being part of it. It was a bit longer than we usually do, but it was very, very interesting. So thanks everyone for joining, and thank you to our panelists to have joined the webinar. Sydney, you have one to add?
And yeah, thank you so much. This was wonderful, and
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for the time. Thanks everyone for watching and being part of this webinar. We will be uploading it into our YouTube channel. Thank you again. It was a very insightful conversation. Thanks.
bye.
Thank you.